Sometimes the universe has a cruel sense of timing. You spend years building walls around your heart, convincing yourself you've moved on, that the past is buried deep enough it can't hurt you anymore. Then, one ordinary morning, on a crowded commuter train, everything you've carefully constructed comes crashing down in a single moment. One look, one face, one child who carries features you thought you'd never see again. This is the story of how Rachel Monroe's perfectly ordered world shattered between two subway stops, and how the truth she'd been running from finally caught up with her in the most unexpected way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The smartphone alarm chirped insistently at 5:30 in the morning, pulling Rachel Monroe from a dreamless sleep. She silenced it with practiced efficiency, already mentally organizing the day ahead before her feet touched the cold hardwood floor of her downtown Chicago apartment. The view from her floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city still draped in pre-dawn darkness, lights twinkling like earthbound stars across the skyline. Rachel moved through her morning routine with the precision of someone who had eliminated all unnecessary variables from her life. Shower at 5:35, exactly 7 minutes. Coffee brewing while she dried her hair. Makeup application took 12 minutes, not a second more. Her closet, organized by color and season, made outfit selection effortless. Today she chose a charcoal gray suit with a silk blouse the color of champagne, paired with her favorite Louboutins. The shoes were an indulgence, but Rachel had learned that in the corporate world, every detail of your presentation mattered. By 6:45, she was out the door, her leather briefcase containing everything she needed for the quarterly board meeting that would consume most of her day. At 34 years old, Rachel had become the youngest chief executive officer in her company's 60-year history, an achievement that had made headlines in the business sections of every major publication. Monroe Industries, the commercial real estate development firm she now commanded, employed over 2,000 people across 15 states. Her rise had been meteoric, fueled by an almost obsessive work ethic that left little room for anything resembling a personal life. The train platform was already crowded when Rachel arrived, a sea of bleary-eyed commuters clutching coffee cups and staring at their phones. She positioned herself at her usual spot, the place where the second car door would open, maximizing her chances of finding a seat for the 30-minute ride to the financial district. The morning air carried the bite of early autumn, and Rachel pulled her coat tighter, watching her breath form small clouds that dissipated quickly in the artificial light of the station. When the train pulled in with its familiar screech and hiss, Rachel boarded efficiently, claiming a seat near the window. She pulled out her tablet, intent on reviewing the presentation slides one final time. The board could be ruthless, particularly the old guard who still resented that a woman barely in her 30s now sat in the chair that had been occupied by men twice her age for decades. Rachel had learned to anticipate every question, prepare for every challenge, leave no opening for criticism. The train lurched forward, and Rachel lost herself in the numbers and projections that would determine whether her proposal for expansion into the Seattle market would receive approval. She was so focused that she didn't notice the train filling up at the next stop, didn't register the shuffle of new passengers finding spaces in the crowded car. It wasn't until the train started moving again that something made her look up. Later, she would try to remember what exactly drew her attention. Was it a familiar laugh? A scent that triggered some buried memory? Or just that inexplicable sixth sense that makes you aware of being watched? Whatever it was, Rachel lifted her eyes from her tablet and looked across the aisle. Time stopped. Marcus Chun stood less than 6 feet away, one hand gripping the overhead rail, his body swaying slightly with the motion of the train. He was looking down at something, hadn't noticed her yet. 7 years had changed him in subtle ways. His jaw was more defined, his shoulders broader beneath a navy blue jacket. His hair, which he'd always worn slightly too long, was now cut in a style that suggested professional success. But it was undeniably him, the man who had been her entire world once. The man whose absence had carved out a hollow space in her chest that had taken years to fill with ambition and achievement. Rachel's first instinct was to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen him, to go back to her tablet and hope he would never notice her. But she found herself frozen, unable to tear her gaze away. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such force she was certain everyone in the car could hear it. Then Marcus shifted his position slightly, and Rachel saw what he'd been looking at. A child, a little boy, maybe 3 years old, sat on the seat beside where Marcus stood. The child had a small backpack decorated with cartoon dinosaurs resting on his lap, and he was playing with what appeared to be a toy truck, making soft engine noises as he rolled it along his thigh. He had a mop of dark hair that fell across his forehead, and when he looked up at Marcus with a question Rachel couldn't hear over the train's noise, she saw his face clearly. The world tilted on its axis. The child had Marcus's eyes. Not just the same color, that deep brown that could look almost black in certain light, but the exact same shape, the same thick lashes, the same slight epicanthic fold. His nose was a miniature replica of Marcus's, and the way his mouth curved when he smiled up at the man beside him was so hauntingly familiar that Rachel felt like she might be sick. Her tablet slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the floor of the train car. The noise made several people look in her direction, including Marcus. Their eyes met. Rachel watched recognition dawn on his face, saw the color drain from his features. For a moment that stretched like taffy, they simply stared at each other across the narrow space of the train car, while the city rushed past the windows and the other passengers remained oblivious to the silent earthquake happening in their midst. Marcus opened his mouth as if to speak, but before any sound emerged, the train began to slow for the next stop. The automated voice announced the station, and Rachel moved on pure instinct. She bent down, grabbed her tablet, and stood up just as the doors slid open. Without a backwards glance, without any acknowledgement of what had just happened, she pushed through the crowd and stepped onto the platform. It was the wrong stop. She was still 15 minutes from her office. But Rachel walked quickly toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the train car that held ghosts she thought she'd successfully buried. She made it up the stairs and halfway down the block before she had to stop, pressing one hand against the cool stone of an office building to steady herself. Her other hand went to her chest, as if she could somehow slow the frantic beating of her heart through sheer force of will. A child. Marcus had a child, a son who looked exactly like him. The implications crashed over her in waves. Marcus had moved on. Obviously, it had been 7 years. She couldn't have expected him to remain frozen in time, pining for what they'd lost. But seeing the evidence of his new life, his new family, hit her with unexpected force. Rachel forced herself to breathe slowly, to regain the composure that was her armor in the business world. She had a board meeting in less than 2 hours. She had no time for this kind of emotional spiral. What Marcus Chun did with his life was none of her business. It hadn't been her business for a long time. She pulled out her phone and ordered a car service, unable to face the thought of going back underground to catch another train. While she waited for the driver, she checked her reflection in a darkened store window, making sure her carefully applied makeup hadn't betrayed any emotion. The face that looked back at her was perfectly composed, every hair in place, the picture of corporate confidence. No one would ever know that inside, she was screaming. The board meeting went exactly as Rachel had planned. She presented her Seattle expansion proposal with calm authority, fielding questions with the kind of preparation that left no room for doubt. By the time the vote was called, approval was unanimous. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, Rachel moved through the congratulations and follow-up discussions in a kind of fog, her mind split between the conference room and a train car where a little boy with familiar eyes played with a toy truck. She made it through the rest of the day on autopilot, attending meetings, signing documents, making decisions that affected millions of dollars and hundreds of lives. It wasn't until she was back in her apartment that evening, the city lights once again spread out before her windows, that she allowed herself to really think about what had happened. Rachel poured herself a glass of wine and sat in the leather chair that faced the view, her mind replaying those few seconds on the train over and over like a film stuck on loop. The way Marcus had looked at her, the shock in his eyes, but more than that, the child. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She couldn't stop seeing that little face, so much like his father's. How old had the boy been? 3, maybe? Which meant Marcus had moved on quickly after their breakup. The thought shouldn't have hurt. Rachel had been the one to end things. After all, she'd been the one to choose her career over their relationship, to accept the promotion that required relocating to Chicago and leave Marcus behind in Boston. He'd asked her to stay, or at least to try long distance. She'd said no. It had been the right decision. She'd built an empire in the 7 years since. She'd achieved everything she'd set out to accomplish and more. Monroe Industries was her legacy, her purpose, the thing that defined her. It was enough. It had to be enough. But late at night, in the silence of her expensive apartment, Rachel sometimes wondered what the alternative timeline looked like. The one where she'd said yes instead of no. Where she'd chosen love over ambition. Where maybe there was a different child, one that shared her features instead of just Marcus's. She finished her wine and poured another, knowing she was indulging in exactly the kind of unproductive thinking she normally didn't allow herself. Tomorrow she would be fine. Tomorrow she would go back to being Rachel Monroe, CEO, the woman who had everything figured out. But tonight, just for tonight, she let herself remember. Rachel had met Marcus Chin 8 years ago at a corporate networking event she'd almost skipped. She'd been a junior executive then, hungry and driven, working 18-hour days to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. The event had been held at a trendy downtown Boston restaurant, full of people making small talk and exchanging business cards while pretending the expensive appetizers were substantial enough to count as dinner. Rachel had been nursing a club soda and planning her exit strategy when someone bumped into her from behind, causing her to spill her drink down the front of her dress. She'd spun around, ready to unleash the kind of controlled fury she was becoming known for at work, and found herself face to face with the most apologetic man she'd ever seen. He'd been holding 2 wine glasses and trying to navigate the crowd, and the collision had been entirely accidental. Marcus had immediately set down the glasses and grabbed a handful of napkins from a nearby table, apologizing profusely while trying to help clean up the mess. Most men in that situation would have made it awkward, but somehow Marcus had managed to be both genuinely sorry and slightly funny about the whole thing, making self-deprecating jokes about his lack of coordination that had made Rachel laugh despite her ruined dress. He'd insisted on paying for the dry cleaning, which led to an exchange of phone numbers, which led to a coffee date that turned into a 4-hour conversation that covered everything from their careers to their favorite books to their most embarrassing childhood memories. By the end of that first real date, Rachel had known something fundamental had shifted in her carefully ordered world. Marcus worked in architectural design, creating spaces that were both functional and beautiful. He approached his work with a passion that matched her own, but unlike Rachel, he also believed in balance. He hiked on weekends, played basketball with friends, volunteered at a youth center teaching kids about design and art. He had a life outside of work, something Rachel had never prioritized. Their relationship had unfolded over the course of a year, and for the first time in her adult life, Rachel had found herself caring about something other than her next promotion. Marcus had a way of making her laugh, of pulling her out of her own head, of reminding her that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. He told her he loved her on a rainy Tuesday evening, standing in her kitchen while they cooked dinner together. There had been no grand gesture, no elaborate setup, just Marcus stirring pasta sauce, turning to look at her with those deep brown eyes and saying the words like they were the most natural thing in the world. Rachel had said it back without hesitation and meant it. For a while, she believed they could make it work, that she could have both the career and the relationship, the success and the love. Marcus had believed it too. They talked about the future in abstract terms, about maybe getting married someday, about what their hypothetical children might look like. Then Monroe Industries had offered her the promotion, Chief Operating Officer of the Chicago division, with a clear path to the CEO position within a few years. It was everything she'd worked for, the culmination of a decade of sacrifice and dedication. But it required relocating immediately. She'd told Marcus about the offer over dinner at their favorite restaurant. She'd watched his face carefully, looking for his reaction. He'd smiled and congratulated her, saying how proud he was, how much she deserved it. But his eyes had been sad. They'd talked about options. Long distance. Him relocating with her. Her turning down the offer. But as they discussed each possibility, the fundamental incompatibility had become clear. Rachel couldn't turn down the opportunity. It would never come again. And Marcus had a life in Boston, a career he loved, a support system of friends and family. More than that, he wanted someone who would put the relationship first sometimes, who would make compromises, who would choose him over work when it really mattered. Rachel couldn't promise to be that person. She didn't want to lie to him. So she'd ended it. Clean break, no drawn-out goodbye. She'd moved to Chicago 2 weeks later and threw herself into work with even more intensity than before, using ambition as an anesthetic for the ache in her chest. For the first year, she'd checked Marcus's social media occasionally, unable to completely sever that last thread of connection. She'd seen pictures of him at gallery openings, hiking trips with friends, the kinds of activities that made up a full life. Then one day she'd looked and found his accounts deleted, or at least made private enough that she couldn't access them anymore. She'd taken it as a sign and stopped looking. Now, sitting in her apartment 7 years later, Rachel pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done in years. She searched for Marcus Chin's name on social media. His Instagram was still private, but his LinkedIn profile was public. She clicked on it, her heart pounding even though she was just looking at a professional networking site. His profile picture showed him looking polished and confident, every inch the successful architect. His headline listed him as principal designer at Chin Associates, his own firm apparently. He'd done well for himself. Rachel scrolled through his experience section, noting the progression of his career, the awards and recognition he'd received. There was no personal information, nothing about a family or a child. Not that there would be on LinkedIn. She switched to Facebook, but his profile was locked down tight. All she could see was his profile picture, the same professional shot from LinkedIn, and his cover photo, which showed an architectural rendering of what looked like a community center. Rachel was about to give up when she noticed that they had one mutual friend, Stephanie Liu, a woman Rachel had worked with briefly in Boston before the promotion. Rachel hadn't spoken to Stephanie in years, but they'd remained connected online the way people do. Without overthinking it, Rachel composed a message. She kept it casual, asking how Stephanie was doing, mentioning that she'd thought of her recently. Then, as if it were an afterthought, she added that she'd run into Marcus Chun that morning and was wondering how he was doing these days. She hit send before she could talk herself out of it, then immediately regretted it. What was she doing? Why did it matter? Marcus's life was his own, and she had no claim to any information about it. But curiosity gnawed at her. The child's face haunted her thoughts. She needed to know. Rachel tried to distract herself with work, pulling up emails on her laptop and reviewing contracts that needed her attention. But her eyes kept drifting to her phone, checking for a response from Stephanie. It came 2 hours later, just as Rachel was considering calling it a night. Stephanie's message was friendly and chatty, catching Rachel up on her own life before addressing the question about Marcus. The relevant part made Rachel's stomach clench. Oh wow, you ran into Marcus. Small world. I'm still in touch with him occasionally. He's doing really well. Started his own firm a few years ago, and it's taking off. And yes, he has a son now, Ethan, who just turned 3. Sweetest kid. Marcus is a great dad from what I've seen. The situation is a bit complicated, though. He's not with Ethan's mom anymore. Actually, I don't think they were ever officially together. Co-parenting situation from what I understand. But Marcus has him at least half the time, and you can tell being a dad is like his whole world now. He posts about that kid constantly. It's actually really sweet. Rachel read the message 3 times, each word settling into her consciousness like stones dropping into still water. Not with the mother. Co-parenting. Had the child at least half the time. So Marcus was single. Not that it mattered. Not that Rachel had any right to care. But the knowledge changed something in her calculation of the morning's encounter. That moment on the train hadn't been about running into her ex and his happy new family. It had been more complicated than that. Rachel thanked Stephanie for the information and said something vague about being glad Marcus was doing well. Then she set her phone aside and stared out at the city lights, trying to process this new information. The next morning, Rachel took a car service to work instead of the train. She told herself it was because she had an early meeting and needed the extra time to prepare, but she knew she was avoiding the possibility of another encounter. She wasn't ready to face Marcus again, not with all these unresolved feelings swirling inside her. But Chicago, for all its size, could be surprisingly small in certain circles. 3 days after the train incident, Rachel attended a fundraising gala for a children's hospital. Monroe Industries was a major sponsor, and Rachel's presence was expected. She dressed in a navy gown that was elegant without being flashy, her hair swept up in a style that took 20 minutes and looked effortless. The ballroom was filled with Chicago's elite, people Rachel knew from various business dealings, charity boards, and social functions. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, making small talk and writing checks, her public face firmly in place. She was standing near the bar, waiting for a glass of white wine, when she heard a voice behind her that made every muscle in her body tense. Rachel. She turned slowly, already knowing who she would see. Marcus stood a few feet away, looking unexpectedly handsome in a well-tailored tuxedo. His expression was cautious, uncertain in a way that was unusual for the confident man she remembered. "Marcus," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Hello." For a moment they just looked at each other, the noise of the gala fading into background static. "I wasn't sure if you'd talk to me," Marcus admitted. "After the train the other day." Rachel accepted her wine from the bartender, buying herself a moment to compose a response. "You caught me off guard," she said finally. "I wasn't expecting to see you." "Me neither," Marcus said. "I didn't even know you were in Chicago." 3 years now," Rachel said. "I'm with Monroe Industries." Recognition flickered in Marcus's eyes. "You're the CEO. I saw that announcement. Congratulations." "Thank you." Rachel sipped her wine. "And you have your own firm now." Marcus looked surprised that she knew. "Yeah, Chin Associates. We do mostly community-focused projects, affordable housing, public spaces, that kind of thing." "That sounds like you," Rachel said, and meant it. Marcus had always cared more about creating beautiful spaces for everyone rather than designing luxury condos for the wealthy. An awkward silence stretched between them, full of 7 years of unspoken words. "Your son," Rachel said finally, deciding to address it directly. "He's beautiful." Marcus's whole face changed when she mentioned the child, softening in a way that made Rachel's chest ache. "Thank you. His name is Ethan. He's 3. He looks just like you," Rachel said. "Yeah," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Poor kid didn't stand a chance in the genetics department. He's all me." Rachel wanted to ask 1,000 questions. About Ethan's mother, about the co-parenting situation Stephanie had mentioned, about how Marcus had ended up with a child just a few years after their relationship ended. But she had no right to those answers. "I should let you get back to the party," Rachel said, gesturing vaguely at the crowded ballroom. Marcus looked like he wanted to say something else, but he just nodded. "It was good to see you, Rachel. You look well." "You too," she said. She watched him walk away, disappearing into the crowd. And she absolutely did not spend the rest of the evening scanning the room, hoping to catch another glimpse of him. The following week fell into a routine that was almost normal. Rachel went back to taking the train, but she varied her schedule slightly, boarding at different times, standing in different cars. She told herself it was just to change up her routine, not because she was avoiding anyone specific. Work consumed most of her waking hours, which was exactly how Rachel preferred it. Monroe Industries was in the middle of acquiring a smaller competitor, and the due diligence process required her complete attention. She spent long hours in conference rooms with lawyers and accountants, reviewing documents and strategizing about integration plans. It was during one of these marathon sessions, late on a Thursday evening, that her assistant knocked on the conference room door with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Carla said, "but there's someone in the lobby who says he needs to speak with you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." Rachel frowned. I'm in the middle of something. Can you take a message? I tried that, Carlos said. He was pretty insistent. Said he'd wait as long as necessary. Who is it? Rachel asked, already annoyed at the disruption. Marcus Chun. The name hit Rachel like a physical impact. She glanced at the 3 lawyers and 2 accountants sitting around the conference table, all looking at her expectantly. Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes, Rachel said, keeping her voice professionally neutral despite the way her heart rate had suddenly accelerated. She wrapped up the meeting with efficient speed, delegating tasks, and setting up the next session for the following morning. Then she took the elevator down to the lobby, using the descent to try to calm her racing thoughts. What could Marcus possibly want? Why would he show up at her office unannounced? The lobby of Monroe Industries was designed to intimidate, all marble and glass and soaring ceilings. Marcus stood near the windows, looking out at the street, his hands in his pockets. He dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, and something about seeing him in that space, the intersection of her corporate world and the personal past she tried to leave behind, felt jarring. Marcus, Rachel said as she approached. He turned, and she saw tension in his shoulders that matched what she felt. Rachel, thanks for seeing me. I know I should have called first. What's this about? Rachel asked, keeping her tone businesslike. Marcus glanced around the lobby, noting the security guard at the desk and the occasional employee passing through. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? Rachel hesitated, then nodded. There's a coffee shop across the street. Give me a minute to get my things. 10 minutes later, they were seated at a corner table in the nearly empty coffee shop, both holding cups they weren't drinking. The space was a stark contrast to the polished elegance of Rachel's office, with its mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I need to talk to you about something, Marcus began, his fingers drumming nervously on his coffee cup. And I debated whether to bring it up at all, but I decided you deserve to know. Know what? Rachel asked, a sense of foreboding building in her chest. Marcus took a deep breath. Ethan's mother, his mom. She's having some health issues, and she needs to go to treatment for a while, which means I'm going to have full custody of Ethan for the foreseeable future. Rachel waited, not understanding why this information required an in-person conversation. The thing is, Marcus continued, Ethan's care situation is about to get complicated. I've been managing with my current setup because I only had him half-time, but now I need to figure out full-time childcare while I work. My parents are in California and can't relocate right now, and I'm going to be juggling a lot, trying to keep my firm running while being a full-time single dad. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I met someone at a work conference, another architect. We both knew it wasn't serious, just 2 lonely people seeking distraction. It lasted maybe 2 months before we both realized we were using each other to avoid dealing with our actual problems. Rachel listened without judgment, understanding all too well how grief could lead to poor decisions. When she told me she was pregnant, Marcus continued, we had a long conversation about what to do. She was honest that she didn't see us having a future together as a couple, and I agreed. But she wanted to keep the baby, and I wanted to be involved as a father. So we worked out a co-parenting arrangement. That must have been difficult, Rachel said. Marcus nodded. It was terrifying, actually. I had no idea how to be a father. But then Ethan was born, and the moment I held him, everything changed. Suddenly, I had this purpose, this person who depended on me completely. It forced me to get my life together, to stop wallowing in what I'd lost and focus on what I had. He smiled, and Rachel could see the genuine joy in his expression. Being Ethan's dad is the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though the circumstances weren't ideal, even though I'm constantly exhausted and worried I'm doing everything wrong, I wouldn't change it. What happened with his mother? Rachel asked carefully. You mentioned she's dealing with health issues. Marcus's expression grew more serious. Vanessa has struggled with substance abuse issues on and off since before Ethan was born. She's been clean for stretches, but she's had relapses. Right now, she's going into a treatment program, which is the right choice, but it means I have Ethan full-time for at least the next 6 months, maybe longer. That's a lot to handle, Rachel said. It is, Marcus admitted, but I'll figure it out. I always do. My firm is flexible enough that I can adjust my schedule, and I have good people who can handle things when I need to be with Ethan. Rachel found herself admiring his determination, his commitment to his son, even when the situation was complicated and challenging. It was so characteristic of the Marcus she remembered, the man who always stepped up when needed. "Can I ask you something now?" Marcus said, shifting the conversation. "Why did you reach out? What did you want to talk about?" Rachel took a sip of her coffee, buying time. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since we ran into each other. About choices I made, roads not taken. And I realized I never gave you closure back then. I just left, and I never explained why in a way that was fair to you. And now you're explaining," Marcus said. "Why now?" "Because seeing you again made me realize how much I've been running from," Rachel said. "I built this perfect life on paper, but there's been this hollow space at the center of it that I've filled with work and achievement. And I convinced myself that was enough, that wanting more was weakness. But it's not enough," Marcus said, reading between her words. Rachel shook her head. "No, it's not." They looked at each other across the small table, years of history and hurt and lingering connection creating a tension that was almost tangible. "So what do we do now?" Marcus asked quietly. "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "We're different people than we were 7 years ago. We have different lives, different responsibilities. You have Ethan to think about." "I do," Marcus agreed. "He's my first priority, always." "As he should be," Rachel said. "I'm not suggesting we could just pick up where we left off. That's not realistic." "Then what are you suggesting?" Rachel took a breath, surprised by her own boldness. "I'm suggesting that maybe we don't have to be strangers. Maybe we can try being friends, or at least friendly. See where things go without any expectations or pressure." Marcus considered this. "You want to start over?" "In a way," Rachel said. "Get to know who we are now instead of who we were then." A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. "I think I like that." They spent the next hour talking, and it felt different from their previous conversations. Less weighted by the past, more curious about the present. Marcus told her about his firm, about the community projects he was passionate about the challenges and joys of single parenting. Rachel shared stories about building Monroe Industries, about the satisfaction of closing deals and the loneliness at the top. When they finally left the coffee shop, the rain had stopped and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. They stood on the sidewalk outside, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "So, friends," Marcus said, holding out his hand with a slightly ironic smile. Rachel shook it, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. "Friends," she agreed. As she walked back to her office, Rachel felt something unfamiliar, a lightness in her chest, a sense of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She didn't know where this path would lead, or if it would lead anywhere at all. But for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. The following weeks established a new pattern in Rachel's life. She and Marcus texted occasionally, casual messages about work or random observations about the city. Nothing heavy, nothing that suggested they were anything more than two people who used to know each other and were now reconnecting as friendly acquaintances. But Rachel found herself looking forward to those messages in a way that probably wasn't entirely appropriate for someone who was supposedly just being friendly. They met for coffee twice more over the next month, conversations that grew progressively easier as they navigated the strange territory of their renewed connection. Marcus told her more about Ethan, showing her pictures on his phone, and Rachel found herself genuinely charmed by the toddler's gap, toothed grin, and wild hair that refused to be tamed. What Rachel didn't expect was how much she would think about that little boy. She'd never been particularly drawn to children, had always assumed motherhood wasn't in her future, given her career focus. But there was something about knowing Ethan was Marcus's son, about seeing Marcus's features reflected in that small face, that made her curious in a way she couldn't quite explain. It was during their fourth coffee meeting that Marcus extended an unexpected invitation. "Ethan's having a birthday party this Saturday," he said somewhat nervously. "Nothing big, just a few kids from his daycare and some family friends. I know it's probably weird to invite you, but I thought I'd mention it in case you wanted to come." Rachel's first instinct was to decline. Attending a 3-year-old's birthday party felt like crossing a line from friendly acquaintances into something more intimate, more complicated. But before she could formulate a polite refusal, she found herself saying yes. Marcus's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Great. Really great. Fair warning, though, it's going to be chaos. 3-year-olds don't really do organized activities. I think I can handle chaos, Rachel said with a smile. I run a company with 2,000 employees. Different kind of chaos, Marcus said, laughing. But we'll see. Saturday arrived sunny and warm. One of those perfect autumn days Chicago occasionally offered. Rachel had debated for an embarrassingly long time about what to wear, finally settling on jeans and a soft sweater, casual but still put together. She'd also spent far too much time in a toy store trying to find an appropriate gift for a child she'd never met, eventually settling on a set of building blocks that claimed to encourage creative thinking. The party was at a park near Marcus's neighborhood, and when Rachel arrived, she could hear the sounds of children's laughter and excited screams before she even saw the gathering. She followed the noise to a pavilion where balloons in primary colors were tied to every available surface, and a banner proclaimed Happy 3rd Birthday, Ethan, in letters that suggested someone had spent considerable time on the decoration. Marcus spotted her almost immediately and waved her over. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that had somehow already acquired what looked like frosting stains, and his hair was slightly disheveled. He looked happy and relaxed in a way Rachel had rarely seen him, even when they were together. "You made it," he said, genuine warmth in his greeting. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "I said I would," Rachel replied, holding out the wrapped present. "For the birthday boy." "You didn't have to bring anything," Marcus said, but he was clearly pleased. "Come on, I'll introduce you to Ethan." He led her toward a small cluster of children who were currently engaged in what appeared to be a race to see who could run in the most random pattern. One of them, a boy with Marcus's dark hair and eyes, was in the lead, shrieking with delight as he zigzagged across the grass. "Ethan," Marcus called. "Come here for a minute, buddy." The boy skidded to a stop and ran over, his small chest heaving with exertion. His face was flushed and sweaty, and he had a juice stain down the front of his shirt that matched the theme of general dishevelment shared by all the children present. "What?" he asked, then noticed Rachel and suddenly became shy, pressing himself against Marcus's leg. "This is my friend Rachel," Marcus said, ruffling his son's hair. "She brought you a birthday present." Ethan peeked out at Rachel, his expression uncertain. "You did?" Rachel crouched down to his level, remembering something she'd read about how to interact with young children. "I did. Do you want to see it?" Ethan nodded, curiosity overcoming shyness. He took the package from Rachel carefully, as if it might break, then looked up at Marcus for permission. "Go ahead," Marcus encouraged. Ethan tore into the wrapping paper with the enthusiastic destruction only a 3-year-old could manage. When he saw the building blocks, his face lit up with pure joy. "Look, Daddy," he exclaimed, holding the box up. "Building blocks. I can make towers." "You can make anything you want," Rachel said, charmed despite herself by his excitement. "Thank you," Ethan said, the words clearly prompted by Marcus's meaningful look. Then, more naturally, he added, "Do you want to play with me?" The question caught Rachel off guard. She glanced at Marcus, who looked equally surprised. "I think Rachel probably wants to talk to the other adults," Marcus started, offering her an out. But Rachel found herself saying, "Actually, I'd love to see what you can build." Ethan's grin was blinding. He grabbed Rachel's hand with sticky fingers and pulled her toward a picnic table that had been set up as a play area. Marcus followed, looking bemused and pleased in equal measure. For the next hour, Rachel found herself immersed in the serious business of block construction. Ethan had very specific ideas about what they were building, a castle for dragons who were friends, not scary ones, he assured her, and he guided her contributions with the authority of a seasoned architect. Marcus sat nearby, sometimes helping, more often just watching with an expression Rachel couldn't quite read. Other children drifted over to join in, and Rachel found herself managing a small construction crew of toddlers, all of whom had opinions about the castle's design. When it was time for cake, Ethan insisted that Rachel sit next to him. She found herself squeezed onto a picnic bench between the birthday boy and a little girl who spent the entire time telling her an incomprehensible story about her cat. Marcus sat across from them, and several times Rachel caught him watching her with something that looked like wonder. The cake was chocolate with far too much frosting, and Ethan managed to get it everywhere except in his mouth. He was laughing hysterically at something another child said when he turned suddenly and smeared frosting across Rachel's cheek. There was a moment of horrified silence as Ethan realized what he'd done. His eyes went wide and his lower lip started to tremble. Before Marcus could intervene, Rachel started laughing. She scooped a small amount of frosting from her cheek and dabbed it on Ethan's nose. "Now we match," she said. Ethan's worried expression transformed into giggles, and soon the other children were laughing too. Marcus handed Rachel a napkin, his eyes warm with appreciation for how she'd handled the situation. As the party wound down and parents began collecting their sugar-high offspring, Marcus and Rachel worked together to clean up, stuffing trash into bags, and taking down decorations while Ethan played quietly nearby, finally exhausted from the excitement. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said as they worked. "I know this probably wasn't how you planned to spend your Saturday." "I had a good time," Rachel said, and realized she meant it. "Ethan is wonderful. Marcus, you should be really proud." "I am," Marcus said softly. "He's the best thing I ever made." They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, and Rachel found herself not wanting the afternoon to end. But other guests were leaving, and she knew she should go too. She said goodbye to Ethan, who surprised her by throwing his arms around her legs in a spontaneous hug. "Thank you for my present and for building the castle," he said. "You're very welcome," Rachel replied, feeling something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Marcus walked her to her car, and they stood by the driver's door, neither quite ready for the goodbye. "He really liked you," Marcus said. "Ethan doesn't warm up to people that quickly usually." "He's easy to like," Rachel replied. "So are you?" Marcus said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that neither of them seemed ready to unpack. "I should go," Rachel said finally. Marcus nodded. "Same time next week for coffee." Actually, Rachel heard herself say, "How about dinner instead? Somewhere nice, not just coffee shop casual." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. "Like a date?" Rachel's heart pounded, but she held his gaze. "Yes, like a date." A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. "I'd like that." As Rachel drove home, the sun setting behind the Chicago skyline, she felt terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. She was stepping off the safe path she'd built for herself, venturing into territory she'd once decided was too dangerous to explore. But maybe, she thought, maybe some risks were worth taking after all. The week leading up to her dinner with Marcus felt both endless and far too short. Rachel found herself distracted at work, catching her mind wandering during meetings, checking her phone more frequently than usual for messages from Marcus. It was unsettling how quickly he'd worked his way back in her thoughts, occupying mental real estate she'd kept carefully empty for years. They texted throughout the week, conversations that started professional and gradually became more personal. Marcus sent her a photo of Ethan wearing his new building blocks like a hat. Rachel shared a story about a particularly difficult negotiation that had ended in her favor. Small moments of connection that felt significant precisely because they were so ordinary. On Thursday evening, Marcus texted her the name of a restaurant, an Italian place in Lincoln Park that had just earned a Michelin star. The choice felt deliberate, a statement that this was indeed a real date, not just two old friends catching up. Rachel made reservations for Saturday at 7, then spent Friday afternoon doing something she rarely did, leaving work early to get her hair done. Sitting in the salon chair while the stylist worked, Rachel caught her own reflection and barely recognized the expression on her face. She looked nervous, hopeful, young somehow, despite being 34 years old and one of the most powerful executives in her industry. Saturday arrived with that peculiar mixture of anticipation and dread that precedes moments that might change everything. Rachel spent an hour trying on different outfits before settling on a dark green dress that brought out her eyes, elegant without being overly formal. She left her hair down, remembering how Marcus used to love running his fingers through it. The thought made her pause. Was she really doing this? Opening herself up to someone who had already hurt her once, or more accurately, Someone she had hurt? What if it didn't work? What if it did work, and she had to make impossible choices all over again? But the alternative, continuing to live in the safe but sterile world she'd constructed, suddenly felt unbearable. Rachel arrived at the restaurant exactly on time, years of business training making punctuality automatic. Marcus was already there, waiting near the entrance, and when he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her stomach flutter. He dressed in dark slacks and a shirt that somehow managed to be both casual and sophisticated, and Rachel was struck by how handsome he was, how the years had refined rather than diminished his appeal. "You look beautiful," Marcus said as she approached. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Rachel replied, smiling. The hostess led them to a quiet corner table. They spent the first few minutes making small talk while they looked at menus, both of them dancing around the significance of what they were actually doing. It wasn't until after they'd ordered that Marcus leaned back in his chair and said, "So, we're really doing this?" "Apparently so," Rachel agreed. "I have to admit," Marcus continued, "I never thought we'd end up here. When I saw you on that train, I figured that would be it. A random encounter, maybe an awkward conversation, then we'd go back to our separate lives. Is that what you wanted?" Rachel asked. Marcus considered the question. "I don't know what I wanted. Part of me hoped we'd never cross paths again because seeing you hurt. But another part of me had been wondering for 7 years what happened to you, how you were doing, if you ever thought about us." "I thought about you," Rachel admitted, "more than I probably should have." Their food arrived, providing a natural pause in the conversation. As they ate, they fell into easier topics, sharing stories about their work, their lives in Chicago, the strange small world of their overlapping professional circles. But underneath the surface conversation, Rachel could feel the current of something deeper, questions neither of them was quite asking yet. It wasn't until dessert, a shared tiramisu that Rachel only picked it while Marcus did most of the actual eating, that the conversation turned more serious. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "What changed? 7 years ago, you were so certain that your career had to come first, that a relationship would compromise everything you wanted to achieve. What's different now?" Rachel set down her fork, considering how to answer honestly. "I achieved everything I set out to do," she said finally. "I got the CEO position, built the company, earned the respect of the industry. And I thought once I got there, to the top, I'd feel complete, fulfilled. But you don't," Marcus said, reading her expression. "I feel successful," Rachel corrected, "which isn't the same thing." She paused, searching for the right words. "You know what the view is like from my office? It's spectacular. You can see the whole city spread out below. But I realized recently that I've been so focused on reaching that view, on getting to the top, that I forgot to build anything worth coming home to." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture feeling both natural and momentous. "You build an incredible career, Rachel. You should be proud of that." "I am proud," Rachel said, "but I'm also tired of pretending it's enough." She looked at their joined hands, then up at Marcus. "I'm tired of being alone." The raw honesty of her admission hung between them. Marcus's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, and Rachel felt 7 years of carefully maintained distance crumbling. "I'm scared," she added quietly, "of messing this up again, of not being able to balance what I want with what you and Ethan need, of being the same person who hurt you before." "You're not the same person," Marcus said firmly. "Neither am I. And yeah, there are complications. I have a son who has to be my priority. You have a company that demands most of your time. We're both carrying baggage from the past." "But Rachel," he squeezed her hand gently, "maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to have it all figured out right now." "Then what do we do?" Rachel asked, echoing the question from their coffee shop conversation weeks ago. "We try," Marcus said simply. "We see what happens when we stop being afraid of what we might lose and start focusing on what we might gain." The restaurant was emptying out around them, the staff beginning their end-of-night routines. They'd been there for almost 3 hours, Rachel realized with surprise. Time had passed differently, the way it does when you're completely absorbed in something, someone. Marcus paid the check despite Rachel's attempts to split it, and they walked out into the cool night air. The street was quiet, just a few other diners and late-night wanderers. Neither of them moved toward their cars. I don't want this to end, Rachel admitted. It doesn't have to, Marcus said. He pulled out his phone. Ethan's at Vanessa's sister's place tonight. I don't have to pick him up until tomorrow afternoon. The implication in his words was clear, and Rachel felt her pulse quicken. Are you inviting me back to your place? Only if you want to, Marcus said. No pressure. We can also just walk around for a while, talk more. Whatever you're comfortable with. Rachel thought about her empty apartment, about going home alone to her spectacular view and her perfectly organized life that suddenly felt like a cage. Then she thought about Marcus's hand warm around hers, about the way he looked at her like she mattered in a way that had nothing to do with her job title or net worth. I want, as she said. They drove separately to Marcus's place, a renovated brownstone in a neighborhood Rachel had always admired but never spent much time in. His apartment was on the second floor, and as he unlocked the door, Rachel felt butterflies in her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness and everything to do with anticipation. The space inside was exactly what she would have expected from Marcus. Warm and lived in, with architectural details that showed his professional eye and the comfortable clutter of someone actually inhabiting rather than just occupying space. Toys were scattered in one corner, and children's drawings decorated the refrigerator. It felt like a home in a way Rachel's carefully designed apartment never had. Sorry about the mess, Marcus said, quickly gathering up some of Ethan's toys. Wasn't expecting company. I like it, Rachel said honestly. It feels real. Marcus set the toys in a basket and turned to face her. Would you like some wine? Coffee? I can also make tea if you prefer. Wine sounds good, Rachel said. While Marcus went to the kitchen, Rachel wandered around a living room, taking in the details of his life. There were photos on the shelves, many of Ethan at various ages from newborn to recent. A few showed Marcus with other adults, presumably friends and family. Rachel studied one that showed Marcus holding a tiny Ethan, looking exhausted and terrified and completely in love. That was the day we brought him home from the hospital, Marcus said, returning with 2 glasses of red wine. I had no idea what I was doing. Pretty sure I called my mom 6 times that first night just to make sure he was breathing correctly. Rachel accepted the wine and gestured to the photo. You look happy, though. Despite being terrified, I was, Marcus said, happier than I'd been in a long time. They settled on the couch, leaving a careful space between them that felt both respectful and charged with possibility. For a while they just talked, conversation flowing easily as it had at dinner. Marcus told her more about his firm, about the project he was currently working on that involved designing affordable housing units that didn't sacrifice beauty or functionality. Rachel shared stories about the challenges of running a major corporation, about the constant balancing act between growth and sustainability. At some point, the space between them on the couch disappeared. Rachel wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly she was tucked against Marcus's side, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. It felt so natural, so right, like coming home after a long journey. This is nice, she murmured. Yeah, Marcus agreed, his voice rumbling in his chest. It really is. They stayed like that for a long time, just being close, relearning the feeling of physical intimacy that was about comfort rather than passion. But gradually the atmosphere shifted, becoming charged with an awareness that had been building all evening. When Marcus tilted Rachel's chin up and kissed her, it felt inevitable. The kiss started gentle, almost tentative, but quickly deepened as 7 years of separation and longing poured into it. Rachel's fingers tangled in Marcus's hair, pulling him closer, and his hands slid to her waist, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against Rachel's. I've imagined this so many times, he admitted. Me too, Rachel confessed. What happens now? Marcus asked, the question that seemed to define their relationship. Rachel pulled back slightly so she could look him in the eyes. Now we stop overthinking and just feel. She kissed him again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. Years of denial and repression fell away as they rediscovered each other, older and changed, but fundamentally still the same people who had loved each other once. Much later, Lying in Marcus's bed with dawn light starting to filter through the curtains, Rachel traced patterns on his bare chest and let herself feel the contentment she'd denied herself for so long. Marcus's fingers played idly with her hair, and everything felt perfect in a way that scared her precisely because it was so perfect. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked quietly. "That I don't want this to end," Rachel admitted. "But I'm terrified it will." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Nothing good comes with guarantees, Rachel. We could do everything right and still have it fall apart. Or we could take the risk and build something amazing. The only way to know is to try." Rachel propped herself up on one elbow so she could see his face. "And you're willing to try? Even knowing how it ended before?" "I'm willing," Marcus confirmed. "But I need you to be all in this time. I can't be your backup plan or your safety net while you prioritize everything else. If we do this, we do it as partners." "I want that," Rachel said. "But I don't know how to be a partner without losing myself. That's what scared me before." "Then we figure it out together," Marcus said simply. "We communicate, we compromise, we make each other a priority without either of us disappearing. It won't always be perfect, but it can still be good." Rachel kissed him softly, sealing the promise. "Okay," she said. "Let's try." They spent the rest of the morning in bed, talking and touching and occasionally drifting into comfortable silence. At noon, Marcus reluctantly extricated himself to shower and get ready to pick up Ethan. Rachel borrowed one of his shirts and made coffee while he got ready, marveling at how domestic it all felt. When Marcus emerged from the bedroom, dressed and ready to retrieve his son, he found Rachel standing at his kitchen window, looking out at the neighborhood below with a thoughtful expression. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about now?" "The future," Rachel admitted. "How different it might look from what I imagined." "Different bad or different good?" Marcus asked. Rachel leaned back against him. "Different good. Scary good." They drove separately to pick up Ethan, Marcus explaining that he didn't want to overwhelm his son by suddenly introducing someone new in his life. Rachel understood, even appreciated his caution. Whatever they were building, it had to include Ethan from the start, which meant moving at the child's pace, not theirs. She went home to her own apartment, and the space that had felt like a sanctuary now seemed empty and cold. Rachel stood at her window, looking out at the city, and realized something fundamental had shifted. The view was the same, but she was different. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she was willing to prioritize something other than her career. She was willing to risk the perfectly controlled life she'd built for the messiness and uncertainty of love. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And Rachel couldn't wait to see where it led. Looking at Rachel directly, "I'm telling you this because our firms might be crossing paths soon. There's a project I'm bidding on, a mixed-use development on the south side. I know Monroe Industries is also in the running for it. And I wanted to be upfront about my situation before we potentially ended up competing." Rachel processed this information, still not entirely sure why it required this conversation. "Okay," she said carefully. "I appreciate the transparency. But Marcus, our personal history doesn't have to factor into business decisions. If you're the best firm for the job, you should get it." "I know that," Marcus said, "but I also know how this industry works. If word gets out that I'm dealing with personal complications, it could affect how I'm perceived professionally. I just wanted you to hear it from me directly rather than through rumors." There was something he wasn't saying. Rachel could feel it. She studied his face, noting the lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there 7 years ago. "Is that really why you came here?" she asked quietly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No, not entirely." "Then what?" He met her eyes, and Rachel saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "I saw you on that train, and it brought everything back. All of it. And I realized there are things I never got to say to you, things I should have said 7 years ago, but didn't because I was hurt and proud and angry." Rachel's throat felt tight. "Marcus, we don't have to do this." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I want to. I need to." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too intimate. Rachel wanted to leave, to escape this conversation before it could cut open wounds she'd worked so hard to heal. But something kept her in her seat, waiting. "When you left," Marcus said, "I understood why. I knew that job was everything you'd worked for. I couldn't ask you to give it up. But what hurt was that you didn't even seem conflicted about it. You just chose your career without hesitation, like what we had didn't even factor into the equation. That's not true, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then tell me, Marcus said. Tell me what you were feeling, because from where I stood, it looked like I was easy to leave behind. Rachel felt 7 years of carefully controlled emotion threatening to break through. You think it was easy? She said, anger and pain sharpening her words. You think I didn't care? I cared so much it terrified me. That's why I had to leave. Marcus looked confused. I don't understand. Rachel took a shaky breath, words spilling out that she'd never intended to say. I was falling too deep, Marcus. Every day with you made me want things I'd convinced myself I couldn't have. The career, the success, those were goals I could control. I knew how to achieve them. But what we had, that was chaos. That was terrifying. Because I knew if I let myself want it too much, I might choose it over everything I'd worked for. So you chose first, Marcus said, understanding dawning. Before you could be tempted to choose wrong. Rachel nodded, her eyes burning. I thought if I made a clean break, if I just committed fully to the career path, I could make the wanting stop. I could become the person I was supposed to be instead of the person I was becoming with you. And did it work? Marcus asked. For a long time, Rachel didn't answer. Then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, she said, I don't know. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them seemed ready to address. I should go, Rachel said abruptly, standing up. This was a mistake. Rachel, wait. But she was already walking toward the door, needing air, needing space, needing to not be having this conversation anymore. Marcus didn't follow her, and she was grateful. She made it back to her office and up to the executive floor before the tears started, and she locked herself in her private bathroom until she could pull herself together. That night, alone in her apartment, Rachel poured herself a glass of wine and sat in her usual chair, staring out at the city lights without really seeing them. The carefully organized life she'd built felt suddenly fragile, like a house of cards that one wrong breath could topple. Her phone buzzed with a text. She almost ignored it, but something made her check. It was from Marcus. I'm sorry for ambushing you tonight. That wasn't fair, but I'm not sorry for saying what I said. You deserve to know that it mattered, that you mattered. Whatever happens with the business stuff, I hope we can at least be civil. For what it's worth, I'm glad you got everything you wanted. You earned it. Rachel read the message 3 times, her finger hovering over the reply button. There were so many things she could say, so many truths she could tell. But in the end, she just typed back a simple response. Thank you for your honesty. Good luck with everything. It was a coward's answer, she knew, but it was all she could manage. The weekend that followed was one of the longest of Rachel's life. She tried to distract herself with work, but for once the emails and spreadsheets couldn't hold her attention. Her mind kept drifting back to that conversation in the coffee shop, to Marcus's words, to her own unexpected confession. By Sunday evening, Rachel had made a decision. She couldn't keep avoiding this. Whatever was happening between her and Marcus, whether it was just the remnants of old feelings or something more complicated, she needed to address it directly instead of running away. She'd spent 7 years running. Maybe it was time to stop. She composed a text to Marcus, then deleted it. Wrote another, deleted that too. Finally, on her 4th attempt, she settled on something simple. Are you free for coffee this week? I think we should talk. His response came within minutes. Yes. Wednesday afternoon? Same place? Rachel agreed, then spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled anxiety that her assistant definitely noticed, but was too professional to comment on. Wednesday afternoon arrived cold and rainy, the kind of weather that made Chicago feel particularly gray and unwelcoming. Rachel left the office at 2:30, telling Carla she had an off-site meeting, which wasn't technically a lie. Marcus was already at the coffee shop when she arrived, seated at the same corner table they'd occupied the previous week. He stood when he saw her, a gesture of courtesy that seemed to come naturally to him. They ordered coffee, and for the first few minutes, they engaged in the kind of surface-level small talk that people use to avoid addressing what really matters. The weather, the surprisingly good coffee, the eclectic art on the walls. Finally, Marcus set down his cup and looked at Rachel directly. You wanted to talk? Rachel nodded, gathering her courage. I've been thinking about what you said last week, about how it looked like leaving you was easy for me, and I realized I never gave you the full truth back then. I thought a clean break would be kinder, but maybe I was wrong. Marcus waited, giving her space to continue. When I got the Chicago offer, Rachel said, I was terrified, not of taking the job, but of how much I wanted to stay in Boston with you. I never wanted anything the way I wanted you, and it scared me how easily I could picture giving up everything I'd worked for if it meant we could stay together. Then why didn't you? Marcus asked gently. Because I didn't trust it, Rachel admitted. I didn't trust that it would last. I watched my mother give up her career for my father, watched her make him her whole world. And when he left, when the marriage fell apart, she had nothing. No career to fall back on, no identity of her own. She was lost. Marcus's expression softened with understanding. So you were afraid of losing yourself. I was afraid of becoming someone who needed another person to feel complete, Rachel said. I wanted to be strong enough, successful enough, that I'd never have to depend on anyone else for my sense of worth. And you made me feel like I could be weak, like I could lean on you, and that terrified me more than anything. Loving someone doesn't make you weak, Rachel, Marcus said quietly. I know that now, she said. Or at least, I understand it intellectually. But back then, I couldn't risk it. So I chose the safer option, the one where I was in control. And now, Marcus asked, 7 years later, sitting where you are now, do you feel like you made the right choice? Rachel considered the question carefully. I built the career I wanted. I achieved every goal I set for myself. By any objective measure, I made the right decision. That's not really an answer, Marcus pointed out. I know, Rachel said, because if it was the right decision, I shouldn't still be wondering about the alternative, should I? They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that admission settling between them. Can I ask you something? Rachel said finally. Ethan, how did that happen? I mean, not the mechanics of it, she added quickly, feeling herself blush. But the situation. Stephanie mentioned your co-parenting. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Rachel remembered from years ago whenever he was about to tell her something difficult. It's complicated, he said. About 6 months after you left, I was in a bad place. Drinking too much, taking on too many projects, basically doing anything to avoid dealing with how I felt about the breakup. He paused. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm Rachel had never experienced before. She and Marcus saw each other 3 or 4 times a week, carefully working around her board meetings and his parenting schedule. Sometimes they met for dinner after Ethan went to bed. Other times Rachel would come over on weekends, and they would do ordinary things like grocery shopping or trips to the park, with Ethan chattering between them about dinosaurs and trucks and whatever else captured his 3-year-old imagination. Rachel found herself thinking about them constantly during work hours, checking her phone for messages from Marcus, smiling at photos he sent of Ethan doing something adorable. Her assistant noticed the change, commenting that Rachel seemed lighter somehow, less driven by the relentless pressure that had defined her for years. But integrating into Marcus and Ethan's life wasn't without challenges. Rachel had spent her entire adult life prioritizing work above everything else, and changing that pattern proved harder than she anticipated. She missed dinners because meetings ran late. She canceled weekend plans when urgent business required her attention. Each time it happened, Marcus was understanding, but Rachel could see the flicker of worry in his eyes, the unspoken question of whether she was falling back into old patterns. The real test came 6 weeks into their renewed relationship. Monroe Industries was in the final stages of acquiring a competitor, a deal Rachel had been working on for months. The process required her complete attention, 18-hour days and weekend work sessions. She barely saw Marcus for 2 weeks, communicating mostly through hurried text messages and late-night phone calls where she was too exhausted to do more than say goodnight. When the deal finally closed, Rachel felt the familiar rush of professional triumph. She'd pulled off one of the biggest acquisitions in the company's history, positioning Monroe Industries for massive growth. The board was ecstatic. Her photo would be in the business sections again, another feather in her already impressive cap. But when she finally had time to see Marcus, showing up at his apartment late on a Friday evening with an expensive bottle of wine to celebrate. She found him distant in a way that made her chest tighten with anxiety. They sat on his couch, the wine untouched on the coffee table, and Marcus looked at her with an expression that was careful and guarded. "I'm glad your deal went well," he said. "I know how much work you put into it." "But," Rachel prompted, hearing the unspoken word hanging in the air. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of stress. "But I need to know if this is how it's always going to be. You disappearing for weeks at a time, work consuming everything. Because if it is, I need to know now before Ethan gets any more attached to you." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. "I told you this deal was important," she said defensively. "You said you understood." "I do understand," Marcus replied. "But Rachel, you missed Ethan's preschool performance. You canceled 3 dinners in a row. You were so absorbed in work that when I told you about Vanessa extending her rehab stay, which means I have Ethan full-time indefinitely, you didn't even respond to the message." Rachel felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I thought I responded. Things were just so crazy and work came first," Marcus finished quietly, just like it always does. "That's not fair," Rachel protested. "You knew who I was when we started this. I have responsibilities, people depending on me, and I have a son depending on me," Marcus said, his voice firm but not angry. "A son who asks about you constantly, who gets excited when he thinks you're coming over, who's starting to see you as part of his life. I can't let him get hurt because you're not ready to make room for us." Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. "So what are you saying? That we're done?" Marcus shook his head. "I'm saying we need to figure out what we actually want here. Because right now it feels like we're repeating the same pattern from 7 years ago, and I can't do that again. I won't do that to Ethan." The conversation ended with Rachel leaving, both of them needing space to think. She drove home through the dark city streets, tears streaming down her face, feeling like she was losing everything that mattered again because she didn't know how to hold onto it. That night, alone in her apartment, Rachel did something she hadn't done in years. She called her mother. The conversation started awkwardly, years of distance and unresolved tension making small talk difficult. But eventually Rachel found herself pouring out the whole story about Marcus and Ethan, about her fears of losing herself, about not knowing how to be both successful and in love. Her mother listened without interrupting, and when Rachel finally fell silent, exhausted from emotion, her mother spoke with a gentleness Rachel hadn't heard in years. "You know what I regret most about my life?" her mother said. "It's not that I gave up my career for your father. It's that I made it an either-or choice. I thought I had to sacrifice everything to be a good wife and mother. And when that fell apart, I had nothing left." "But Rachel, honey, that was my mistake. You don't have to make the same one." "I don't know how to do both," Rachel admitted. "Neither did I," her mother said. "But you're smarter than I was. You've built something real, something that's yours. The question isn't whether you can keep your career. It's whether you're willing to share your life with people who love you, even when it's messy and complicated and requires compromise." "What if I'm not good at it?" Rachel asked. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail," her mother said simply. "But at least you'll have tried. Living a perfectly controlled life where you never risk anything might feel safe, but it's also lonely." "I should know." After they hung up, Rachel sat for a long time thinking about her mother's words. About all the years she'd been so terrified of repeating her mother's mistakes that she'd made the opposite mistake, building walls so high nothing could get in to hurt her, but also nothing could get in to heal her. The next morning, Rachel did something unprecedented. She called an emergency board meeting and announced she was appointing a chief operating officer, someone she'd been mentoring for years who was more than ready for the responsibility. She would remain CEO, but she was restructuring her role to be more strategic and less operational, freeing up time for the life she wanted to build outside the office. The board was shocked. Some were supportive. Others questioned whether she was really committed to the company's future. But Rachel stood firm, realizing that if she couldn't trust her own team to handle day-to-day operations, then she'd failed as a leader anyway. Then she went to Marcus's apartment. It was Saturday afternoon, and when he opened the door, she could hear Ethan playing in the background. Marcus looked surprised to see her, and cautiously hopeful. "Can we talk?" Rachel asked. They sat in his living room while Ethan built an elaborate tower in the corner, occasionally showing them his progress. Rachel took a deep breath and began. "You were right," she said, "about everything. I was falling back into old patterns because it felt safe, because I know how to be good at work, and I don't know how to be good at this. But I want to learn. I want to do better." Marcus listened, his expression carefully neutral. "I restructure my position at work," Rachel continued. "I'm delegating more, creating boundaries I should have established years ago. I can't promise I'll be perfect at it. I'm sure I'll mess up sometimes. But I'm committing to making you and Ethan a real priority, not just something I fit in around work." "What changed?" Marcus asked quietly. "I realized I'd rather risk failing at this than succeed at being alone," Rachel said. "I spent 7 years thinking I'd made the right choice, that my career was enough. But it's not. You're what I want. You and Ethan. A real life, not just an impressive resume." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Rachel felt her heart pounding, waiting for his response. Then Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Rachel, come see my tower. It's really tall." Both adults looked at the little boy, who was beaming with pride at his construction. Marcus looked back at Rachel, something softening in his expression. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, let's try. But Rachel, I need you to understand something. If you're going to be part of Ethan's life, you need to be all in. Kids don't understand nuance. He won't understand if you keep disappointing him." "I know," Rachel said, "and I promise I'll do everything I can to be someone he can count on." Marcus stood and extended his hand to pull Rachel up from the couch. "Come on," he said with a small smile. "Let's go admire that tower before it falls." The months that followed were the hardest and most rewarding of Rachel's life. Learning to balance her career with a relationship and a child who depended on her required constant adjustment. She had to turn down opportunities she would have jumped at before. She had to leave the office at reasonable hours, even when there was more work to be done. She had to be present at school performances and birthday parties and ordinary Tuesday evenings when nothing special was happening, but her presence mattered anyway. It was exhausting. It was uncomfortable, and it was absolutely worth it. Rachel watched Ethan grow from shy 3-year-old into a confident 4-year-old who called her by name and saved his best drawings for her. She learned his favorite foods, his bedtime routines, the exact way to read his favorite story with all the right voices. She discovered that she had a capacity for love she'd never accessed before, a fierce protectiveness over this small person who'd worked his way into her heart without her permission. Her relationship with Marcus deepened in ways their younger romance never had. They fought sometimes real arguments about boundaries and priorities and how to handle conflicts. But they also talked through their issues instead of running away. They compromised. They supported each other's dreams while building new dreams together. On a cool evening in early spring, almost a year after that first encounter on the train, Rachel stood in Marcus's kitchen helping Ethan frost cookies for his preschool class. She had flour in her hair and frosting on her shirt, and she was laughing at something ridiculous Ethan had said about dinosaurs eating vegetables. Marcus leaned against the doorframe watching them, and when Rachel looked up and caught his eye, he was smiling in a way that made her heart skip. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," Marcus said, "just thinking about how much things have changed. Good change or bad change?" Rachel asked, echoing a question from months ago. Marcus walked over and kissed her forehead, then ruffled Ethan's hair. "The best kind of change." That night, after Ethan was asleep and they were curled up on the couch together, Marcus pulled out a small box. Rachel's breath caught, but he shook his head slightly. "It's not what you think," he said. "Not yet anyway. But I wanted to give you this." Inside the box was a key. Rachel looked at it, then at Marcus, confused. "It's a key to this apartment," Marcus explained. "I want you to move in with us. Not because we're rushing anything, but because you're already here most nights anyway, and it feels ridiculous that you're maintaining an apartment you barely use. Plus," he added with a smile, "Ethan asked if you could stay forever, and I told him I'd work on it." Rachel felt tears spring to her eyes. She took the key, feeling its weight in her palm, the symbol of everything she'd once been too afraid to want. "Yes," she said, "I'd love to." Moving in together brought new challenges and new joys. Rachel had to learn to share space, to compromise on everything from furniture placement to morning routines. Her expensive, minimalist aesthetic clashed spectacularly with Marcus's comfortable eclecticism and Ethan's cheerful chaos. But somehow they made it work, creating a home that reflected all three of them. Rachel's colleagues noticed the change in her. She was more balanced, less driven by the constant need to prove herself. Paradoxically, this made her a better CEO. She made clearer decisions, delegated more effectively, focused on strategic vision instead of getting lost in operational details. Monroe Industries continued to grow, but Rachel's identity was no longer solely defined by that growth. She started leaving work by 6 most evenings. She took real vacations. She turned off her phone during dinner, and the world didn't end. Her company didn't collapse. If anything, things ran more smoothly because she'd built a team that could function without her constant oversight. One afternoon, Rachel picked Ethan up from preschool, something she'd started doing once a week. As they walked hand in hand toward the car, Ethan looked up at her with serious eyes. "Rachel," he asked, "are you going to be my mom?" The question caught her completely off guard. She knelt down to his level, tried to find the right words. "Well, you have a mom," she said carefully. "Your mom who's working really hard to get better. But I love you very much, and I'm not going anywhere. Is that okay?" Ethan thought about this with the intense concentration only a 4-year-old could bring to philosophical questions. "Can I have 2 moms?" he asked finally. Rachel felt her eyes sting with tears. "I think you can have as many people who love you as you want." Ethan nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Okay, I love you too." It was the first time he'd said it, and Rachel had to take a moment to compose herself before she could respond. "I love you too, buddy. So much." That evening, she told Marcus about the conversation. He pulled her close, and she could feel the tension leaving his body. "He's really attached to you," Marcus said. "You know that, right?" "I know," Rachel said, "and I'm attached to him. To both of you." "Good," Marcus said, "because I have a question I've been meaning to ask." He pulled away slightly so he could look at her face. "We've been living together for 6 months now. Ethan loves you. I love you. And I know we've been taking things slow, making sure we get it right this time. But Rachel, I don't need more time to know what I want." He took her hand. "I want this. I want us. I want to build a life with you, officially and permanently. So Rachel Monroe, will you marry me?" Rachel felt joy bubble up inside her, pure and uncomplicated. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." They married quietly 6 months later, a small ceremony with close friends and family. Ethan was the ring bearer, taking his job with adorable seriousness. Rachel's mother came, and for the first time in years, they embraced without the weight of old resentments between them. Standing at the altar, looking at Marcus, and seeing Ethan watching them with wide eyes, Rachel felt something she'd chased for years without ever catching. She felt complete. Not because Marcus or Ethan completed her, they didn't need to. She was whole on her own. But because she'd finally learned that being whole didn't mean being alone. That success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. That the most important things in life were the connections you built, the love you gave and received, the ordinary moments that added up to an extraordinary life. The reception was held in Marcus's office courtyard, surrounded by the beautiful spaces he designed. As Rachel danced with her new husband while Ethan ran around with other children, stealing cake and laughing with pure joy, she thought about that morning on the train almost 2 years ago. She'd been so focused on where she was going that she'd almost missed seeing what was right in front of her. A second chance, a family, a love that had waited patiently for her to be ready to receive it. Life wasn't perfect. Work still demanded attention. Ethan still had hard days. Marcus and Rachel still argued about whose turn it was to do dishes or how to handle Ethan's occasional tantrums. Vanessa remained a complicated presence in their lives, in and out of treatment, doing her best but struggling with demons that wouldn't easily release their hold. But perfect wasn't the goal anymore. Real was the goal. Present was the goal. Building something meaningful with people who mattered, that was the goal. Years later, when Ethan was older and asked Rachel about how she and Marcus got together, she would tell him about the train, about the moment that changed everything, when the universe conspired to put them in the same place at the same time, giving them a second chance they almost didn't take. And she would tell him that the bravest thing she'd ever done wasn't building a company or negotiating billion-dollar deals. It was choosing to open her heart again after convincing herself she didn't need that kind of vulnerability. It was choosing love over fear, connection over control, a messy, beautiful real life over a perfectly curated, empty one. Because in the end, success wasn't measured in office square footage or company valuation or the number of zeros in a bank account. It was measured in moments like these, ordinary Tuesday evenings with her husband cooking dinner while their son did homework at the kitchen table, everyone exactly where they belonged. Rachel had spent years trying to reach the top, only to discover that the top was exactly where she'd started. Right here, with the people who love her not for what she'd achieved, but for who she was beneath all the achievements. And that, she finally understood, was worth more than any empire she could build. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.